Welcome to History in Flames. Empires rise and fall. The past comes alive in fire and ash. Subscribe and relive the stories that shaped the world. May 1945. In Europe, the guns fell silent. The deadliest war in human history was finally over. 6 long years of slaughter had left entire nations in ruins. Cities like Warsaw, Dresden, Stalingrad, and Berlin were nothing but shattered stone and ashes. Tens of millions were dead. Millions more were homeless, displaced, or orphaned. In London, Paris, and New York, crowds filled the streets, waving flags, singing, and embracing strangers. Across the continent, church bells rang for the first time in years. But even as victory was celebrated, a darker reality was already emerging. The Grand Alliance that had destroyed Nazi Germany was fracturing. United States and the Soviet Union allies just weeks earlier now stood as rival superpowers. Their competing visions for the future would divide not just Germany, not just Europe, but the entire world. This is the story of how World War II gave birth to the Cold War, and how in 1945, the seeds of a new conflict were sown. The war in Europe had ended, but the cost was staggering. The Soviet Union had lost more than 27 million people, soldiers and civilians alike. Entire cities had been obliterated, farms burned, and infrastructure destroyed. Stalin's Red Army had marched from the ruins of Stalingrad to the heart of Berlin, but the victory was paid in blood. Britain, though victorious, was bankrupt and exhausted. The empire that had once spanned the globe was in decline, unable to sustain itself after years of bombing, rationing, and debt. France was humiliated and devastated, its cities scarred by occupation and liberation. In Germany, the nation that had launched the war, was now a wasteland. Its cities were piles of rubble, its leaders dead or captured, its people starving. Into this chaos stepped the Allies not as liberators, but as occupiers. And each brought their own vision of what Europe's future should be. At the Alta Conference in February 1945, even before Hitler's defeat, the Allies decided Germany's fate. The nation would be divided into 4 zones of occupation. The Americans, British, and Soviets each claimed a section, and later the French were given a slice as well. Berlin, though lying deep inside Soviet-controlled territory, was also divided into 4 sectors. For now, this division was presented as temporary, a way to ensure Germany could never rise again as a military threat. But beneath the agreements were deep mistrusts. The Western Allies wanted to rebuild Germany as a democracy and an economic partner. Stalin wanted to keep it weak, dismantle its industry, and turn it into a buffer zone under Soviet influence. Already cracks were forming in the Grand Alliance. The battlefields were silent, but a new contest for power was beginning. The Red Army had not just conquered Germany. By 1945, it controlled nearly all of Eastern Europe. Poland, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and parts of the Balkans lay under Soviet occupation. At first, Moscow promised free elections and independence. But in practice, Stalin installed communist governments loyal to Moscow. Opposition parties were crushed. Political rivals were arrested or executed. Newspapers were censored. By 1948, most of Eastern Europe was firmly within the Soviet orbit. To the west, it looked like Soviet expansion and empire in all but name. To Stalin, it was security. Twice in one generation, Russia had been invaded through Eastern Europe. Now he was determined that no enemy would cross those lands again. The result was the creation of 2 Europes. One democratic, open, and rebuilding with Western aid. The other communist, closed and ruled from Moscow. The Iron Curtain had descended. The war had made the United States and the Soviet Union the 2 most powerful nations on Earth, but their systems could not be more different. In Washington, democracy, capitalism, open markets. In Moscow, one-party rule, communism, centralized control. At first, they worked side by side. But disagreements grew into crises. In 1947, the Truman Doctrine promised to defend free nations against communism. That same year, the Marshall Plan pledged billions to rebuild Western Europe. But the Soviets refused and forced their satellites to reject it too. By 1948, tensions reached Berlin. Stalin tried to starve the city into submission by blockading it. The Allies responded with the Berlin Airlift, flying in food, coal, and supplies for nearly a year. What had begun as an alliance against Hitler had transformed into a global standoff. This standoff would define the world for nearly half a century. The United States responded to Soviet expansion with a new strategy: containment. In 1947, President Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine. America would support free peoples resisting subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. In plain terms, it meant stopping communism. That same year, the Marshall Plan was unveiled. Billions of dollars in American aid would flow to rebuild Western Europe. Factories restarted, farms were revived, and economies recovered. But in the East, Stalin rejected the aid and forbade his satellite states from accepting it. Two Europes were now firmly set, one rebuilt by American dollars, the other bound by Soviet control. What had begun as a war against fascism had transformed into a global struggle between capitalism and communism. The first real confrontation came in Berlin. In June 1948, Stalin blockaded all land routes into West Berlin, hoping to starve the Allies out of the city. But instead of withdrawing, the Americans and British launched the Berlin Airlift. For 11 months, cargo planes flew day and night, delivering food, coal, and medicine to over 2 million Berliners. By May 1949, Stalin admitted defeat and lifted the blockade. But the message was clear. Berlin would be the flashpoint of the Cold War. Soon, two Germanys emerged. In the West, the Federal Republic of Germany; in the East, the German Democratic Republic. The nation that had started the war was now split in two, a permanent scar on Europe's map. The defeat of Nazi Germany ended one war, but it birthed another. From 1945 onward, the world was no longer united against a common enemy. Instead, it was divided into two camps, East and West, democracy and communism, freedom and control. For the next 4 decades, this rivalry would shape every corner of the globe, from Berlin to Korea, from Cuba to Vietnam. The Cold War had begun, and its shadow still stretches across the world today. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more.